Welcome aboard Great Northern 441. It's an F45 locomotive that has been preserved at LOGE Glacier, formerly the Izaak Walton Inn in Essex, Montana. This video is an overview of some of the handles, levers, switches, and gauges on the control stand of this retired locomotive. Going from left to right, you will see the brakes for the air brakes for the train, which you can give a good yank for applying and releasing. You will see a switch that allows the brakes to be set for passenger or freight train service. Right now it's set for passenger train service. If you wanted to switch it and make it a freight train brake system, you would push the button in and turn the knob to the right. Down here is where there used to be a handle for the independent brake, which only controlled the brakes for the locomotive, not for the rest of the train. That handle not being there anymore is a good thing for those of us who need to fit in and out of the engineer's control stand. Here you have your clearly marked bell, and this pulls out and pushes back in for places where you need a bell. Up here you have sand. When you would push this button, sand would deploy through a nozzle directly to where the wheel of the locomotive makes contact with the rail. This was very important when you had a heavy train going up a steep mountain grade, or otherwise when you would need additional traction to keep the train moving or to be able to speed up the train. Up here you have your horn, and the horn switch is still here. However, the horn has been decommissioned, and I'm sure that the neighbors and other lodge guests here are very glad that it's been retired. Over here you have gauges. These two gauges would show how much air pressure was in the air brake system. And this gauge over here would tell you the amperage coming out of the locomotive's generator. A diesel locomotive is actually a diesel electric locomotive and is essentially a large diesel generator that creates electricity, which is then fed to traction motors in the train's wheels to make the wheels turn. The final big gauge up here is your speedometer. This speedometer topped out at 85 miles an hour. Most freight trains do not exceed 70 miles an hour in the United States, and the passenger trains of the Great Northern did not exceed 79 miles an hour during the era that this locomotive operated. In fact, even today, you need a special enhancement to your signal system to be able to enforce speed in a way that would allow you to operate beyond 79 miles an hour. And so over here we get to the controls that move the train. The bottom control here is your reverser. It is set in the neutral position here, but you could move it one way or the other to go in forward or reverse. Let's move it there. Then you have your power throttle. Right now it's set to idle. However, you have up to 8 notches of power, notch 8 being full power. And what you would do with a passenger train, for instance, coming out of a station stop, or a freight train with a heavy load going up a heavy grade, you would want full power. But once you reach your cruising speed, to borrow an aviation term, and you no longer needed to accelerate, you would ease off the throttle to whatever notch allowed you to maintain the speed that you were desiring to operate at. Or if you were about to go down a grade and no longer needed throttle at all, you would return it to idle. When the throttle is in idle, you can also use your dynamic brakes. The dynamic brakes use the electrical generation capabilities of the train to slow down the train rather than speed it up. It cannot fully stop the train, but it can slow it down, creating less pressure and wear and tear on the air brake system when you need to make the final stop. To use the dynamic brake, you have to be operating in forward or reverse. The throttle has to be idle, and you can operate up to 8 notches of dynamic brake. Finally, there are some switches. Down here, you will see the signal light switch and the headlight switch to control headlights either on the front or rear of the locomotive. You have switches here for various other lights, including the gauge lights, which you can turn on here, and the gauge lights still come on. And then when you want to turn them off, they come off. You have the circuit breakers for the front and rear headlights. And then up here, you have 3 switches that were required to make the train start and operate. You had your engine run switch, you had your field generator switch, and you had your fuel pump switch that would basically create safeguards against the train moving when it should not move, because the field generator switch, you could turn it off. And now, even if you put the throttle all the way up to notch 8, you won't be generating any electricity going to the train's wheels to move the train. That's an important step of part of the 3 steps of protection that are needed when you have employees going through and working in between cars of the train, in addition to obvious things like, applying the train's brakes and, not having, or putting the reverser in neutral, things of that nature. And then, of course, the fuel and the engine run switch to start the locomotive up. And with that, you have the control stand of the F-45.